Prime Minister is meeting with his war cabinet for the fourth time since Saturday. Tonight will debate what he should do next and whether he'll heed the warnings to step away from the abyss and to work to follow more aid into Gaza. The choices made in the next few days could reshape this entire region, possibly change the course of the war and how the rest of the world thinks about security. Tonight, I'll ask a senior British politician whether, like Israel, the UK needs its own Iron Dome. Good evening, live from Jerusalem. I'm Yalda Hakim. Now, caution or dilemma. We are discussing tonight what Israel's main issues are. And the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appears to be taking his time, trying to figure out what to do next. He has a few options. All of them come at a price. His British counterpart and leaders from Washington to Moscow have counselled, restrained, and urged him to step away from the abyss. But after the phone calls and the public pleas, all they can do now is nervously look and wait. Tonight, we'll look in detail at Israel's options, but first, let's begin with a piece from Dominic Waghorn.
It is a sobering sight, part of an Iranian Emad missile. This is just its fuel tank. Range 1,000 miles, payload half a ton of explosives, accurate to within 10 metres. These ballistic missiles were fired by the dozen at Israel on Saturday, for which the Israeli military says there will be consequences.
Avril, when will you strike back?
Firing 110 ballistic missiles directly to Israel will not get scot-free. We will respond in our time, in our place, in the way that we will choose.
But exactly what that means is not clear. The world awaits Israel's next move. Can it punish Iran for launching this barrage without plunging the region into a much bigger war?
Standing next to this gives a very powerful sense of the threat posed by Iran's missile onslaught on Saturday, but also the threat to the region should more of these missiles end up flying around if Israel's retaliation escalates the war into a much bigger conflict.
The risk of that happening is very real. In Tehran, Israel's enemies were warning again the smallest Israeli retaliation will be met with another show of force.
If, for any reason, the Zionist regime makes the slightest malevolent move against our homeland, our individuals or our interests, it will definitely face a resolute and hard response.
The fate of the region is for now in the hands of this one man, Benjamin Netanyahu. Meeting new recruits, Israel's Prime Minister was giving little away.
Iran stands behind Hamas, behind Hezbollah, behind others, but we are determined to win there and defend ourselves in all arenas.
There is jeopardy, but opportunity too for Israel, say observers, to build on the coalition of allies and neighbours that helped defend Israel that night.
You know, the real question is, what kind of response does the most harm to Iran and most benefits Israel? What does that mean? I think it probably means don't hit back at Iran, in Iran, right away, when there's a risk that you'll destroy the coalition arrayed against Iran and you won't be able to do much damage.
Instead of attacking Iran, Israel could do more of this, assassinating Iranian allies. Today it killed another Hezbollah commander in southern Lebanon. Israel was also drilling its forces south of the border, a fault line for any escalating conflict with Iran and its proxies. If it happens, a widening war would likely engulf the region, far beyond Israel's borders.
And Dominic joins me here now tonight in Jerusalem. And Dom, we know for the last few days the War Cabinet has been meeting. They've discussed all the options they have on the table, but we haven't heard much more than that.
No, we haven't. We have heard from a number of sources being widely quoted in the Israeli media saying that they have reached a decision on what they're going to do. But they're not saying what it's going to be, and then they're not saying when, and it's not entirely clear they've decided when it's going to happen. But we are being told that the Americans have been consulted. It won't be sufficient to risk an all-out war with Iran. That's the hope, at least. So we have to guess at what that could mean. The only kind of hint we've had about timing was from Herzi Halevi, the Israeli chief of staff. Now, he went to an Arrow air defence base that was used as one of the sort of launch pads for the attempts to shoot down these missiles that came in on Saturday. And what he said to staff there was that they hope to give those defending the home front and Israeli citizens Passover week as a period of relative normalcy, I think he said, normality. So Passover week's next week. So unless it happens this week, or unless it's a ruse to kind of lull the Iranians into a full sense of security, it may not happen until the end of next week. I don't think it's entirely clear they've decided when it's going to be, but they say, or the impression we're getting through these various leaks and sources, that they have decided what it's going to be, just we don't know when.
And earlier today, we had some breaking news that a Hezbollah commander had been killed by the IDF.
Yes, and I think there was a kind of suspicion that maybe that's the beginning. If they have decided what it was going to be, and those reports were coming earlier in the afternoon, that maybe striking Hezbollah commanders or IRGC commanders in Syria and Lebanon was going to be the plan, the counterstrike plan. It might be a rolling programme of assassinations. The impression we're getting now is that actually this was just part of that tit-for-tat exchange of fire over the northern border that we've seen pretty much from October the 7th. And the commander they targeted was someone who's responsible for launching attacks against Israel, particularly using anti-tank missiles that have done a lot of damage in northern Israel. So it looks like it's part of that. It doesn't look as though that is part of the beginning of a counterstrike. But we're still at that sort of limbo time, that sort of hiatus where we're waiting to see what happens, and there's a lot of concern. Obviously, Israel's being watched very closely to work out what it does next, and to, if it is planning something that's not going to risk plunging the region into a much greater escalation, how is it planning to do that? It's going to be very difficult to pull that off, whatever they do.
Well, certainly from the activities of today with the Hezbollah commander killed, it's just a reminder that Israel is fighting multiple wars and conflicts on multiple fronts.
Yeah, it's a funny time, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we are waiting for what is arguably one of the most important decisions an Israeli leader will ever make. And it could lead to wide-ranging ramifications for the stability of the region. But the kind of life goes on as normal here. But there is the war being waged in Gaza and clearly in southern Lebanon as well. All of those flashpoints, potential for greater escalation. With Gaza, Hamas have again rejected a ceasefire proposal. I think the 6th or 7th time they've done that. And they've also said now that they believe they only have 20 humanitarian hostages they could release. So those are people who are either women or children or the sick or men over the age of 50. Now, they had said it was 40. They now seem to be saying they've only got 20 to hand over. So that's causing a lot of concern and anxiety on the Israeli side, accusing Hamas of acting in even worse faith. So those negotiations are going nowhere. The war carries on in Gaza, although there's a bit of a lull, I think, while the Israeli government is distracted about this challenge of what it does with Iran.
Tom, thank you, as always, for all of your analysis there. Well, as we've been saying, the challenges Israel faces are massive. They do want to punish Israel, but how is the question? One of the concerns that many have is that Israel may retaliate by attacking Iran's nuclear sites. And Iran's biggest sites could be under threat, including a uranium enrichment plant and a key nuclear power plant. Earlier, Rafael Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, told me that targeting them was ill-advised. Have a listen.
On Saturday, we were informed by the Iranian government that the nuclear facilities where our inspectors work, carrying out their inspection work every day, would be closed for the day on Sunday on account of these concerns about the possibility of being targeted. I decided to keep them, of course, off the sites an additional day for yesterday, and today they are back at work at the different facilities in Iran.
Just on that point, Mr. Grossi, so you decided to keep your inspectors away for 2 days, and they have resumed work again today?
Yes, they have.
And so is it just business as usual, despite, any concerns that, say, the Iranians may have? You have decided to allow them to return to work and continue their inspections and all of their work?
Well, we are in consultation, of course, with the host country as per standard operating procedure. we consult, we check with them, and based on their assessment, we decide whether to carry out our inspection work or not. In these circumstances, we have them there. Yeah, indeed.
You say you're in conversation and consultation with the host country, which is, of course, Iran. But are you also speaking with Israeli officials?
Not at all on this. I mean, we have a constant dialogue with the government of Israel on many other things. But of course, not on this. Doing so would be assuming that they have plans to target nuclear facilities. It would be incorrect for me as head of an international organization to entertain that kind of conversation with a country. So we are simply reminding everybody that targeting nuclear facilities is contrary to international law, and that the IAEA inspectors are there. And as I said yesterday...
Mr. Grossi, I mean, just give us a sense of what's at stake, because the Israeli officials have said that they believe they need to respond, but of course they have also said they don't want it's not in their interest for all-out confrontation and war with Iran. But of course, doing something like this would be, in fact, pushing the nuclear button and ratcheting things up.
Well, what you're saying confirms that it would not be advisable at all to target nuclear facilities. As you know, targeting a nuclear facility may generate radioactive releases, and radioactive releases do not stop at borders. So it would be a very ill-advised idea. But of course, you know, I'm not in the military planning. Far from that. We are an agency for peace. But we are drawing attention to the fact that this should be out of the question. We do not get into the debates of what has been a very worrisome situation there. We are not oblivious to that. But as far as our work is concerned, we continue.
Mr. Grossi, just very briefly, I mean, are you now concerned that Iran may, in fact, rush to obtain the bomb, given the ongoing escalations in tensions with Israel?
To say that would be highly speculative, and we do not have, as you know, we are permanently there in Iran, inspecting all the facilities. And I don't have any indication out of my inspections that would indicate, in your words, that Iran is rushing to get a nuclear weapon. That being said, we have said it many times, Iran is accumulating big amounts of uranium enriched at levels which are very close to the levels you need if you have a nuclear weapon.
That's Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, speaking to me there a little earlier. So Israel has options, some more dangerous than others, whether it be a targeted strike on Iran's nuclear facilities or military bases, or an attack on Iranian proxies in Lebanon, Syria or Iraq. The War Cabinet is reportedly divided on the best way to respond. Let's discuss those divisions some more now. With me in Jerusalem is Avi Meir, former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, and from Tel Aviv, we're joined by Chuck Freilich, former Deputy National Security Advisor for Israel. Thank you both for joining us here on the program. Chuck, I'll come to you first. As we've been discussing, I mean, the War Cabinet is discussing a range of options. In your view, what should now happen?
Of course, they're discussing a range of options, as is entirely appropriate in the circumstances. And one of the more than legitimate options would be to launch a strong counterstrike. The Iranian attack against Israel was a major attack. It's unprecedented. And in ordinary circumstances, or in other circumstances at least, and I would say that Israel should be responding directly and very heavily to an attack such as this. In this particular set of circumstances, I think the greater prudence is actually not to. And it's to, well, maybe there can be some quiet, limited operation, but not a major one. there was a unprecedented international coalition formed here. It's actually the first time we ever fought together with the United States. The U.S. has been a great supporter for Israel. We never fought together side by side, and certainly not in a major operation like this, together with the UK, with France, with Jordan, with help from a number of other Arab countries. This is a dramatic transformation in the region, and it's one on which I think we should be building for the long term and trying to turn it into a serious anti-Iranian coalition. That's one thing.
I'm just going to keep I'm just going to ask Avi to come into the discussion. Avi, you were just hearing there from Chuck, who said ordinarily, there should be a response. But in this instance, things went well on Saturday. What President Biden said, take the win and now de-escalate. What are your views?
Look, if someone fires a gun at you and you dodge the bullet, the gun has still been shot and the bullet has still been fired. That is indeed what happened on Saturday night. This was an unprecedented attack by Iran directly to Israel. And I think Israel has no choice but to respond. I think a failure to respond would project weakness in many respects, not only to Iran, but to Israel's neighbors, that coalition that Chuck was speaking about. And Israel can't afford to project that weakness at this time. Now, there are, as we said, many options on the table, perhaps more covert options as opposed to more direct ones. But I don't think that Israel can, as others have said, take this win. It's not a win. This is an unprecedented act of aggression that is part of a long line of acts of aggression on the part of the Iranian regime, and Israel has no choice but to respond.
And I'm just going to bring Chuck back in. I mean, Avi is making the point that many here in Israel have made, that there really is no choice, that in this neighborhood, one can't show weakness. Do you think it's a sign of weakness if Israel does nothing now and doesn't respond in any way?
Well, I think Israel's overall deterrent posture was actually strengthened by what happened. And if our response is just a covert one, well, then by definition, the other side doesn't know what we did. So that doesn't help us strengthen our overall deterrence. But I think Iran also managed in a truly remarkable way to bring the international spotlight back onto them, onto their misdeeds, onto the fact that they are a severe threat to the security and well-being of the Middle East and of the international community. And I think it would be a mistake on our part to divert attention back away from them. And this is an opportunity to increase pressure on them in regard to their regional role and, first and foremost, on the nuclear issue. And we also have the unresolved, the unfinished war in Gaza. So I think we can respond at a time of our own choosing when it's most effective. And there is no such thing as we have no choice. You always have a choice. It's a question of how you decide to decide between the different options.
Yeah, Avi, I mean, one thing that we have continually heard, certainly from the Americans and Western allies of Israel, that they've said, look, this shows Iran's true colors, the nature of the regime. Therefore, that's enough. Israel doesn't need to do any more. And that it could potentially undermine the coalition that's been created here, that the Jordanians assisted Israel at the weekend, that other Arab nations were also watching. Do you think then that kind of coalition will be undermined again, and it's a missed opportunity for Israel if it strikes hard now?
Look, I think, again, there are several options on the table. We don't have to have as strong a response to Iran as what we received on Saturday night. We're not talking about 350 missiles necessarily going in Iran's direction. But I think that some limited response is certainly called for at this time. And I think the message that it will send our allies in this region, including those that emerged on Saturday night in our defense, is one of deterrence. And one of determination, and one of a calculated risk. And I think that is exactly what we need to be projecting at this time.
Do you think, Avi, that it's odd that Prime Minister Netanyahu hasn't come out and made any kind of statement to the nation since this attack on Saturday night?
Look, he has come under some criticism for that. I think he's made any number of missteps over the past few months in terms of things he has or has not said. I think that he, like others in Israel's military establishment, is trying to figure out exactly how to handle this situation. We understand that operational plans have already been approved, according to certain reports. It's a matter of timing. I imagine we will hear from him when the time is appropriate.
And Chuck, I mean, you know, there is a big conversation and debate here in Israel about what to do. And as you say, this is now an opportunity to form a coalition. Do you think that can truly happen now at this point? Or do you think that, frankly, Israel should go back to fighting this war with Iran in the shadows as it has for many, many years?
Well, one doesn't preclude the other. I'm always for doing covert operations if you can. And we have an ongoing challenge in terms of the Iranian presence in Syria, which should not be there, and their truly frightening relationship with Hezbollah. So there's plenty of work to do in the Iranian sense, even without launching a major operation against Iran. And as I was saying before, we have to resolve the Gaza issue still. We've got this beginning of the international coalition, or it came to be for the first time now. It's something that we should really build on for the long time. And it could be a change in the entire balance of power in the Middle East, precisely what we want, to isolate Iran rather than being the isolated party which we were.
Yeah, indeed. Chuck Freilich, Avi Meir, thank you both for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.
So we've heard about the options and the risks. Do stay with us, as next we'll discuss the shifting alliances in the region and how Israel's choice could change everything.
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Soham murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone, I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News, at the Old Bailey.
Welcome back. We know that Iran acted after an Israeli attack in Damascus killed 7 senior commanders from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. Last night, a former Israeli military leader told me it's likely those troops were deepening Iranian links with militant groups across the Middle East, and that's an important point. So tonight, we're looking at who Iran supports and what influence that gives Tehran. Sitting at the heart of the Middle East, Iran is close to the most influential and also the most fragile countries. In Lebanon, Iran helped establish Hezbollah. In Iraq, where Tehran influences political events by supporting the Islamic resistance group. In the long-running Syrian civil war, Iran has helped both President Assad and groups which support his regime. It also supports Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Well, let's talk now to Dana Strahl, a former senior Middle East policy official at the Pentagon. Dana, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. There's been ongoing and very serious debate here in Israel over the past few days about what to do. Many are saying that the war cabinet saying, look, that they feel that no response is not an option. It's just a matter of what. I mean, what would you say if you were speaking to Israeli officials?
Well, I think there's been a lot of discussion here in Washington as well about what the appropriate response should be. And there's a tension for the Biden administration here. On the one hand, what Iran is trying to do since the attack over the weekend is say that now any Israeli strike on any Iranian personnel, IRGC commanders anywhere in the Middle East will be met with a state-on-state attack involving cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones like we saw over the weekend. I think that's unacceptable for Israel, and it's also unacceptable for the United States. On the other hand, President Biden has been clear since October. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
President Biden's been clear since October 7th that what he doesn't want to do is have full-scale conventional conflict in the Middle East, and he wants to give Israel the space to complete the military dismantlement of Hamas. So how the Israelis respond, and if they respond soon in a way that tips this up the escalation ladder, I think is the concern for President Biden. What he doesn't want is thousands of U.S. forces flowing into the Middle East to not only defend Israel, but also defend all of the other partners who actually worked in concert with Israel and the United States over the weekend to defend airspace from Iranian aggression.
And Dana, is there serious concern that that scenario which you've just described could actually happen?
Well, previously, we have always shared an assessment with Israel that the way Iran would continue to project power and foment instability in the region is through its proxies, through Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and the other militias. And largely, we've been addressing those militias, so fighting Iran on its periphery and not inside its territory. But now the Iranians have changed the rules of the game by launching this direct state-on-state attack. And the question is how Israel responds. Does that actually cause or force the Iranians to feel they need to do a counter response? And then we're in a cycle that nobody can control.
In your view, is the paradigms now shifting in the Middle East? Because it was also quite extraordinary to see Arab states, namely Jordan, coming to the defense of Israel at the weekend.
I think there are two paradigms that are shifting in the Middle East, one that we have an interest in seeing from Washington and one that we don't. The paradigm that we have an interest in cultivating is the one where Europeans, Arabs, Israel, and the United States all work together, sharing intelligence and warning about Iranian aggression and working together to combat it. Some of that was about defending the sovereign airspace of our partners. Some of it was about defending Israel from Iranian aggression. And some of it was drawing a very firm line about what will and will not stand in the Middle East. The paradigm we don't want to see hold is the one that Iran is seeking to impose unilaterally, which is when anyone attacks IRGC or proxies anywhere in the region, the response is going to be a state-on-state attack. I think that's, again, clearly not in Israel's security interest. It's also not in the interest of the United States, whose forces have also been on the receiving end of more than 180 Iran-backed attacks.
In the event that this, say, escalates, will the United States then be forced, even though President Biden says that the United States has no interest in sort of coming in and stepping in if Israel escalates, will the United States ultimately have no choice?
I think the past 72 hours have been incredibly clarifying for the U.S.-Israel relationship. There's no question that there's been tension in recent weeks about specific aspects of the IDF's campaign in Gaza. But the strategic alignment has always been there, and this has been an opportunity to make it unambiguously, publicly clear that Hamas is an agent of Iran. It has been funded, armed, and trained by Iran, as have all of these other proxies, and now Iran itself has attacked Israel. The focus of the international community is on Iran and its aggression, and the Biden administration has been very clear that its commitment to Israel's security is ironclad, as well as its commitment to support Israel's defense.
Dana, thank you so much for joining us. We're really grateful for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, how big a security risk is an Israeli attack on Iran? Some senior defense figures think the UK should be considering its own Iron Dome. So is that even possible? Find out next. Welcome back. Increasing political tensions across the Middle East means Western nations are now considering their own defence and security. With fears of the conflict spreading, former British Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood suggested Britain needs an Iron Dome system similar to the one Israel used to defend against Iran's attack. Well, Mr. Ellwood joins me now live tonight. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Just help us understand, because you've said that Britain needs to consider having almost like an umbrella of security.
Yes, that's right. I mean, what we've seen is the changing conduct of warfare, if you like, with this scale of drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles all moving at the same time. And if that is the way that warfare is now being conducted, we see this not just in the Middle East, the Iran's attacks, but also what's going on in Ukraine. We need to move with the times as well. It's worth stressing that we have impressive air defense assets. Our Royal Navy is operating in the Red Sea with the Type 45 destroyers. It has the Sea Viper system, able to hit a multitude of targets at the same time. RAF Lossiemouth and Coningsby operate a quick reaction alert Typhoon squadrons, able to get up in the air in 30 minutes notice to operate and conduct similar activities as we saw in defending Israel on the weekend. And then the Army has Sky Sabre, which is another air defense asset as well. But ultimately, there's nothing protecting London, for example, in the same way that Iron Dome operates over Israel. That is the most state-of-the-art, that is the best system in the world by some margin. And certainly as we advance our defense posture, as the world certainly gets more dangerous, we need to start thinking about how we do protect ourselves as the character of war starts to change.
So, Mr. Ellwood, as you say, the Iron Dome is considered, the best in the world. Just help our audiences understand how Israel's defences worked on Saturday night.
Well, they've had, I'm afraid, a long time to develop this because of the regular drumbeat of Hamas rocket launches. And they've developed high-tech capabilities of being able to intercept projectiles, particularly projectiles which are on a parabola that are difficult to recognize mathematically. And that's what makes Iron Dome so incredibly effective. It's also quite diverse. It operates right across Israel itself. It's also tied in, I should say, with an app service, which all the civilians are tied into. Ukraine has something very, very similar indeed. There are Patriot missile systems there too. It's quite an orchestra of capability that is watching the skies 24/7. And it's keeping up with the changing advance of technology, particularly with unmanned aerial systems and kamikaze drones, which is what Iran specializes in. That's what protected Israel. There's no doubt about it. And it somehow, I'm afraid, diluted perhaps the seriousness of this state-on-state attack, in the sense that the absolute majority of those missiles and drones were taken out on the very evening itself. Very little got through.
Mr. Ellwood, I mean, there's often so much criticism around defence spending in the UK and how much more needs to be done for Britain to properly arm itself. Do you think that that's where the focus should be rather than on an Iron Dome?
Well, you ask some really, really important questions. What I would say is that there needs to be a thorough investigation, a review, if you like, of the threats that are emerging. We're seeing Russia develop low-yield tactical nuclear weapons. I pose this as a question. We have none of those. Air defense is another aspect. If you just throw money at the MOD, the Army clearly will demand more tanks, more personnel probably. The Navy will demand probably a larger surface fleet. And the RAF, that's in the end of the Cold War, had 36 fast jet squadrons. They're down to just 6 today. They'll want more jets as well. But we have the whole ISTAR capabilities, cybersecurity, space as well. There's an entire spectrum of security that we need to consider. And it's worth stressing also the symbiotic relationship between our economy and our security, why it's important to invest now as our world gets ever more dangerous. The impact on Red Sea shipping then was going to have a knock-on consequence to our economy. We saw that which is why we deployed assets there. Likewise with Ukraine, when those grain ships didn't get out of Odessa, had a knock-on impact to our economy. Our exposure to international markets, when they are interrupted, impacts on the UK. That's why it's important that we lean forward. And the world is getting more dangerous because what sits behind Iran, of course, is Russia. And what sits behind Russia is China. And we need to perhaps wake up to the fact that we've had 3 to 4 decades of relative peace. We've now entered a new era of insecurity.
And you've said we've entered a new era of insecurity and warfare in this interview. But how likely is that kind of threat, the sort of, attack we saw at the weekend on Israel, how likely is that kind of attack or threat on Britain?
Well, at the moment, it's not. And it's likely that if there is going to be further attacks, it's going to be in the grey zone. It's going to be affecting our economic security as well. But the biggest threat to Europe right now, the most powerful individual in Europe right now, is President Putin. And unfortunately, because America has hesitated in its $60 billion support package, Germany is not providing those important Taurus missile systems. And the rest of Europe has hesitated, not kept up with Britain in offering the military assets that Ukraine needs. The tide is turning there. And if Putin is able to claim any sort of victory whatsoever, he will not stop there. He will continue emulating his hero, Stalin. He's more powerful than Stalin now. And this, I'm afraid, is the dangerous world that we've entered. Then you turn to the Middle East, and as you've been reporting, how dangerous that's now moving, how nobody is in control of events there with a prospect of escalation. We've been too risk-averse, too hesitant in putting fires out across the world now. And we need to brace ourselves, as I say, for an alliance of authoritarian states working together to challenge our global order.
Tobias Ellwood, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, there's been a flurry of phone calls to Tehran and Jerusalem over the past few days, but it hasn't yet become clear which countries might help Iran and Israel de-escalate the current conflict. Well, Finland's Foreign Minister, Elina Valtonen, has been speaking to me and has also, as she told me, speaking to her Israeli counterpart. I asked her whether she got any sense the government there was listening.
I reiterated the Finnish stance that we fully condemn the unprecedented attack on Israel over the weekend, and also reiterated our support for Israel as such. At the same time, we also spoke about the need for de-escalating the conflict in the Middle East, and also I reiterated our stance on the immediate need for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza and
how did the of hostages? Yeah, and we saw your tweets on that. But how did the Israeli Foreign Minister respond?
I will not comment on phone calls where my counterpart shares his thoughts. It's of course in full confidence, but I can speak for my part. But I'm pretty sure that Israel understands that it is now good to act moderately and take steps towards de-escalation. And that is certainly the message, not only from Finland, but also from the European Union.
Are you concerned, though, that this situation won't de-escalate? Because for the last 24 hours, 48 hours, what we've been hearing from Israeli officials is there is a need to respond to this attack. It's just a matter and a question of what?
I think it's very important that all of us, the friends of Israel, make it clear to Israel that it is not in Israel's interest to further escalate the situation. It is in Israel's interest to now act in moderation and restrain itself. And that obviously applies to all parties in the region, and especially to Iran. And I will also take the opportunity this week to speak with my counterpart in Iran and other regional actors as well. Because
and what will you tell your counterpart in Iran?
The message is clear. We fully condemn the attack by Iran this weekend, and we urge Iran to de-escalate as well and to refrain from further attacks. And this is our message to all parties in the region and the European Union. We're just out of the foreign ministers meeting. We had an extraordinary meeting this evening, so we are pretty unified in this.
That's the Foreign Minister of Finland speaking to me a little earlier. Well, all this is a challenge for the US president. But Joe Biden did receive what should have been a huge electoral boost today. The IMF is forecasting the US economy will grow at double the rate of the other countries in the G7 this year. Despite that prediction, though, Mr. Biden is still struggling with low approval ratings on the economy. Our economics editor, Ed Conway, has been in the key state of Pennsylvania to find out why.
This is the town that helped give birth to modern America. The steel from the Bethlehem plant went into the Empire State Building and the Golden Gate Bridge. But now this part of Pennsylvania is at the heart of something else, a political battleground.
We're a swing area in a swing state.
The White House is throwing billions of dollars at silicon chip and green tech manufacturers. But the verdict from here is it's not taking hold yet.
We're encouraged to see that our state and our federal government is taking an interest in economic development
But is it having
policy,
an impact?
but it's not yet having an impact.
Donald Trump was here on Saturday, and today Joe Biden paid a visit to his hometown of Scranton. They both believe this state and the economy could decide the election.
It's a stark contrast from my opponent. He looks at the economy from Mar-a-Lago, where he and his rich friends embraced the failed trickle-down policies that have failed working families for more than 40 years. Scranton values are Mar-a-Lago values. These are the competing visions for our economy.
For some businesses, that government money is beginning to trickle down. This architectural firm has never been busier.
Without that government help, this project would be sitting exactly where it sat 20 years ago.
But in this country of divides, there's a new chasm opening up between what the economists are saying and what people are experiencing. According to the International Monetary Fund's latest figures, no other economy in the G7 is going to grow as fast as the US this year. No other country in the world has outperformed expectations as much as this place. And yet there's a massive gulf between what economists say people ought to be feeling about the economy and what they're actually feeling. And that's ominous for Joe Biden.
Here we go.
Indeed, the president's approval ratings are worse than nearly every one of his predecessors. Why? Part of the answer might be found at this nearby food bank.
It's really the cost of living here that is so struggling, is really challenging people. People who have lived in a home for 4 or 6 years are now can't stay there anymore because their rent skyrocketed.
I go to the grocery store and then I get a couple things and it's like almost 100 and something. So it's very expensive.
So you've noticed it's really expensive, have you?
Yes.
And does it feel like it's getting better or like it's getting worse?
Not really. It's getting worse.
Analysts say while America may not be in recession, it's feeling something else. A vibe session. Bad vibes about inflation, about the standard of living. Vibes that some think could decide this year's election. Ed Conway, Sky News in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
On Sky News at 10, as the world waits to see how Israel will respond to the Iranian attack, Rishi Sunak speaks to Benjamin Netanyahu tonight and urges restraint. Do join me at 10.
Obviously, any parent who's got the means to do so is going to look to help younger members of their family, especially in the current situation where a lot of younger people are struggling to get on the housing ladder. I think about half of baby boomers were able to own their own house by the time they were 30. Now, for millennials, it's under 30%. So you can understand in individual situations why people do that. But when you sort of step back and you apply that society-wide, it's not a very healthy situation where you have a great swathe of the population only able to get on in life if they get a handout from their parents. More to the point, before their parents are dying. You know, once upon a time you might expect to get an inheritance, but now it's having to happen a lot earlier. And that's not just for obviously getting on the housing ladder. With that comes the issue of having children. So we find ourselves in a very unhealthy situation where you're having to try to perpetuate the next generation by giving away as much of your money as you can now. It's not the easiest way of doing it, especially given that in this country a lot of finance is wrapped up in assets, it's wrapped up in wealth, it's wrapped up in your own home. And of course, that's even before we take into account the fact that things like social care, as you get older, is getting a lot more expensive, and a lot more people are needing social care because things like dementia are becoming a lot more prevalent. I don't think you can sort of sit there and say to an individual, no, you shouldn't give your child, you know, your 30-year-old son or daughter money, that's a bad thing. But when you take it in the round as a society-wide issue, I think it's a rather unhealthy situation.
I don't think it's particularly unhealthy, and I also don't think there's a lot of shame associated with this. I've been seeing a lot of headlines, and people have been admitting to feeling embarrassed or mortified about seeking money from parents. But actually, if you look at the stats, over the last 50 years, there's been a 158% increase on UK average house prices. Look at London. The average house price in London is £730,000. People can't get a house nowadays. So going to your mum and dad's, sort of seeking cheap liquidity options, I don't think is at all embarrassing. There's no shame, and I definitely don't think it's unhealthy.
People are working, they leave school, leave university, and they enter the job market at the same time. Two different people. One is going to get on the housing ladder, one is going to be able to have children, one is going to be able to do lots of things because their parents can give them money, and the other one can't. And it doesn't matter how much work that person puts in necessarily. They know that whatever they do, they're at a disadvantage behind this other person simply because this other person's parents bought a house or saved properly at a different time. That doesn't incentivise people to push on. It doesn't incentivise a particularly competitive workplace. And I think it actually sets in a degree of, you don't want to say resentment, but almost sort of resigned to your fate.
Welcome back to this special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live in Jerusalem. Well, while we've been discussing the threat and the attack that Iran launched on Israel at the weekend, what's been slipping from the headlines is the situation in Gaza. Now, today, the foreign ministers of Pakistan and Saudi Arabia met and discussed repeated calls for an immediate ceasefire and delivery of much-needed aid. And as we've said, the focus of the world has shifted, but the situation in Gaza very much remains critical. Now, the figures released by the Gaza Health Ministry earlier today put the number of people killed since October the 7th at 33,843. They say the number of people injured in the same period has reached 76,575. So huge death toll there. And as the global attention has shifted away from Gaza and the focus on what Israel will do next following that attack on Iran, we will be having a look at the situation in Gaza. Have a look.
The UN Human Rights Office urges all states with influence to do everything in their power to halt the increasingly horrific human rights and humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Desperate situation there in Gaza. Well, to discuss this further with me is our International Affairs Editor, Dominic Waghorn. And as I've been saying, Dominic, I mean, for the past almost a week, we've hardly mentioned Gaza and the situation there, the operation that Israel wanted to launch on Rafah, because the focus has really shifted.
It has, yeah, and it's distracted the world's attention, and I think the Israeli government's attention as well. But there's still a war going on. There's just still a huge amount of suffering going on there. But the ceasefire proposal that was made to Hamas has been rejected by Hamas, I think, for a 6th or 7th time. They're now saying they only have 20 women, old men and sick people to exchange. Very bad faith in terrible negotiations between the Israelis and Hamas, indirectly through Qatari mediators. No hope there. And I think, you know, it's a desperate situation for the people of Gaza, and the world's attention is not on there anymore.
OK, Dom, thank you so much. And Dom and I will be back in the next few minutes for the news at 10. Do stay with us for that. But for now, from the team on The World with Yalda Hakim, good night.